Hello, hello.
Okay. I believe we are live once more. Mr. Frank
Once
Corva,
more.
thank you for joining me again for another episode of Capital Gains, where we talk about everything related to policy, politics, digital assets, and anything kind of circulating around those juicy subjects too. Frank, thanks for being here.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of summer vacation, and at least on Capitol Hill, I think. So, in one sense, there's not a ton going on, and yet somehow I think we've got a pretty full agenda again today. We've got Scott Bessent comments, I suppose, to talk about. Maybe Treasury is going to be buying Bitcoin, maybe not. We've got maybe an inkling of an update on the Tornado Cash trial. We've got new Bitcoin policy news in India, and a few other things as well. And of course, you can throw anything you like in there, but we'll run through all of that stuff and we'll see how we go. Before we jump into it, any opening thoughts, Frank? What's this week been like for you?
It was really funny as we were discussing yesterday, texting back and forth about what to cover. Our agenda didn't have too much on it. Then, I feel like the minute we actually sat down to look into what we might be able to discuss, it's like, oh, all this stuff happened actually, and let's talk about it. And I also actually have something that's kind of nuts. I can't get too far into it yet, partially because I have to do a little bit of more research, but it looks like I've been getting these messages from a company in North Dakota about North Dakotan energy providers creating discriminatory practices for Bitcoin miners, charging them more for the electric load that they're purchasing. So I can give a little preview to that. I'll probably dive into that story a little bit more deeply earlier next week if I get around to it. Things have been a little bit hectic, but hopefully I'll be able to dive in. Don't like to see that kind of stuff happening. I think if anything, given that I'm sure, these sorts of Bitcoin miners are looking to buy energy in bulk, if anything, they should probably be getting a discount. And I'm sure, like we see in Texas, miners often help to stabilize the grid. They sort of shut off or give power back to the grid when necessary. I have to do a little bit more research, like I said, but I would guess that these miners are probably willing to act in good faith as well, much like these miners in Texas. And for them to be sort of facing discriminatory pricing kind of sucks, but I'll dive into that more. Don't want to mention any names yet. I'll check with my coworker. He's been the one that's been feeding me this information. I'll see if I can mention any more, maybe by the end of the episode. But otherwise, let's dive in with Mr. Bessent, our U.S. Treasury Secretary.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to him in a moment. Okay. First, I want to just touch on the Tornado Cash trial.
Yep.
Not a huge amount of news here. However, as we discussed last week, and you've reported on extensively, the trial concluded with a kind of a guilty verdict for Roman Storm on one of the three counts he was charged with. Yep. The other two counts, the jury was unable to reach a verdict on. And so it's not quite the end of the story. There's been a memo filed by, I think, jointly, perhaps by both parties, indicating that there will be some post-trial motions forthcoming.
Yep.
On kind of pertaining to, what might happen regarding potential retrials or other things as well.
Yep.
So we know Roman Storm indicated that he intends to fight on. We don't quite know what these post-trial motions are going to look like, but it looks like they're forthcoming. And so it looks like the Tornado Cash saga will be continuing, and you probably will be finding yourself back down at the courthouse.
Oh, my friend, I'm going to need you not to talk about that yet. I'm still recovering from being in there. So I'm not going to try not to think about that too much. I actually saw this get posted and saw some people post about it. Then I saw you add to it, and I was like, I'm going to let Julian handle that one for this week because Frank the Tank over here needs a little bit of a break from the Tornado Cash trial. So
you take a rest. These things move at the speed of justice, which is not overnight. So you should have a little time to rest before hopping on the subway back down to the Southern District of New York. Right. Moving on. This is a couple of days ago. What have we got here? We have a kind of a memo published, or a kind of a letter published jointly with A16Z and some other prominent players in the kind of crypto VC space, arguing for a safe harbor for DeFi applications. So what's the context here? The context here is we've got kind of market structure regulation moving through Congress, now sitting in the Senate, that's going to, should it pass, clarify a bunch of things regarding the jurisdiction of the SEC and the CFTC, and what tokens and what chains and protocols are considered securities and what's not, and all this kind of stuff. One of the sub-issues here is what happens to DeFi platforms. If you have a truly decentralized platform that is not custodying funds, that is not marketing anything, not selling anything, but nonetheless, there are assets that are being traded through your platform that might raise the attention of the SEC in other ways. Well, what are you? Are you a broker dealer, or what do we call this thing that's a truly decentralized platform? So this is the subject of this letter written by A16Z, kind of publishing it for an audience of industry, but also I think the SEC's Project Crypto Task Force and lawmakers generally to kind of consider this question. Without reading through the whole thing, I guess the idea is we kind of scroll down here. What are they pointing to? They're pointing to this hypothetical situation. May or may not be hypothetical. I don't know if it truly exists yet for any of the DeFi platforms that people know the most about. But if they are truly non-custodial, if they truly don't have any discretion over the execution of transactions or where funds are going or anything like that, if they're not soliciting any investment, not making any recommendations, and they're decentralized, what should happen? So A16Z is now arguing that it should be kind of carved out from the picture, at least of SEC kind of Securities Act regulation. Before I get your take on it, I guess I just want to add one thing.
Yep.
This is primarily a Bitcoin show, and this letter does not really pertain to Bitcoin things, not right now, but it's relevant, right? DeFi, decentralized finance, I think will be coming to Bitcoin.
Yep.
So that's one point. Should there emerge, true DeFi Bitcoin projects, this is relevant for them too. And of course, I think there's a bigger issue, context here, where in the same way that we've been talking about Tornado Cash and Samurai and everything else, what we're talking about is the treatment of decentralized protocols by the US government.
Yep.
Right? So it's relevant and important in that context as well.
100%. I have a bunch of thoughts on this actually, and I'm glad you brought this up. One, I want to give a shout out to Botanics, my buddy Willem Schro. It's a layer 2 on Bitcoin. It actually transports over the Ethereum virtual machine, and instead of using ETH as the asset to stake on the network on the layer 2, you actually use Bitcoin, which is kind of bananas. But his basic theory with what he's creating is that, and this speaks to your point about DeFi coming to Bitcoin, is that one day Bitcoin will be the money of the world. This is his theory. And again, he's not like some, far out kook thinking this. Harvard degree from Harvard Business School, master's degree in cryptography from one of the best schools in Europe, and undergraduate in electrical engineering. Smart guy, really smart guy. So, believes in Bitcoin as money, and believes that one day we'll be trading securities, for Bitcoin because they'll be denominated in Bitcoin. We already see platforms like Roxum doing this, but Roxum is a walled garden. It's a gated platform. So we're going to see this eventually happen. And I think there'll be a day when maybe securities will be maybe sort of go up a lot more in value once Bitcoin is, more just sort of money and a bit more maybe stable than it is now, not as volatile to the up or downside. So it's worth discussing. I think this question is a huge one. I actually don't have too much to say about it, but I did tweet about this when I saw SEC Chair Paul Atkins talking about making America the crypto capital of the world, putting securities on the blockchain. The big question there is, what does that mean? Is it on the blockchain via Fidelity's walled garden, or
who's
is
blockchain?
it
yeah.
right? Who's blockchain? Can I interact with that through a MetaMask wallet? Like what are we talking about here? What are the details? And what I fear with this kind of stuff is that it does lead to a lot more justification for KYC AML, because the U.S. government is not going to have U.S. securities floating around in non-custodial wallets. It's not going to happen. I'm not shilling for them. I'm kind of indifferent. I don't think too much about securities on the blockchain yet. I still think we have a lot of work to do with like getting Bitcoin to be more ubiquitous before I'm thinking about other assets, but it is happening and it is something that needs to be discussed. So my thing here is like, I don't really have too much of a comment. I have more questions. What does this actually look like? I don't mind if major financial institutions want to use blockchain on the back end, but we really need to talk about this in the proper context then, because if we're not talking about public networks, public blockchain networks, but instead private blockchain networks, I don't really feel like it's that much of a breakthrough. It's fine, but it's like, what are we actually discussing here? Is just something that's proprietary for the incumbents, for the major financial institutions that exist? Or are we talking about something that's, a platform like Botanix would have to think about, because now there's going to be securities being traded on this Bitcoin layer 2 that they've created. We'll see what that means. I'm sure A16Z might have some more information on this than we do, but it seems like they have questions as well. And they're also trying to maybe get ahead of the curve when it comes to the way that these assets that will ideally be on public blockchains will be managed. So we'll see. My guess, as a final thought here, is that much like stable coins, whatever assets get traded in a tokenized version, either on Bitcoin layer 2s or other blockchains, I would imagine there will be tokenized versions and analog versions, just like I would consider sort of money in your bank account as the analog version that underlies the stable coin. Then you have the tokenized version on top of it that you can redeem for the analog version. I would imagine it's going to be similar for these security issuances. I can't imagine they just get issued on a blockchain and that's the only way that they're managed, essentially. So lots to think about here. Really not sure where we're going in this regard.
Yeah. I don't have fully formed thoughts on this, but I think one thing that it brings to mind for me is, and this is rabbit hole that we don't spend too much time on, but it's what is the definition of decentralized, right? Like what makes Bitcoin decentralized? Well, several things, but I think it's indistinguishable from its censorship resistance, right? Yep. That's what makes it like something can't truly be decentralized if you can go and arrest the founders and shut the project down.
Correct.
It's kind of definitionally, right?
Yeah.
So you can call something a DeFi platform, but you almost kind of give the game away by needing to make this case that we need to kind of protect the team and the company and the founders and all this kind of thing. Well, if that's the case, is it really actually decentralized, right? So
I can answer. I would go with a hard no on that. Yeah. But again, there's variations of this. And I think, I even learned a lot in the Tornado Cash courtroom, this idea of Roman running the server and the front end and the UI and all that, while the actual protocol itself was decentralized. Tornado Cash is still operating as a protocol on the internet right now. So it's all going to be a matter of, I think, the discussion around the interfaces. And then again, if you're doing stuff, if you're building smart contracts, are the keys to those smart contracts being burned? Are they something that cannot be tampered with by any party? And we know with a lot of smart contracts, that's not necessarily the case. Tether freezes funds on smart contract blockchain networks all the time. So there's a lot of nuance to be discussed here.
There is a lot. And, I kind of have two parts of my brain here. On the one hand, I recognize that there is a decentralization spectrum, at least insofar as the law is considered, right? If you look at what just got passed through the House in the Clarity Act, right? There's a kind of decentralization test that very much is nuanced. And on the other hand, there's kind of a kind of pure Bitcoiner part of my brain that says that it's there's one simple test for decentralization, and that's like, does it survive an attack?
Yep.
So
yeah,
I mean, schizo there.
I'm with you as well, but I will say that I think especially the Tornado Cash opened my mind up to that spectrum more. I acknowledged that it existed to a degree, but I'm definitely a bit more opened up to it. Again, this isn't necessarily the topic that captures most of my attention, but it is worth discussing if we have this chair of the SEC talking about making America the crypto capital of the world and blah blah blah. This will all need to be discussed.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, let's move on to something else. Another story. It's kind of a story and a non-story as well, because it kind of got resolved almost as soon as it emerged. reporting from the Rage here on something that happened, I think, 2 days ago, which was the Google Play Store updating its policies with respect to, I don't know, a lot of digital asset Bitcoin applications. In the process, kicking several self-custodial wallets off the Play Store.
Yep.
Now, as the update in this article says, Google since clarified that non-custodial wallets are not meant to be in the scope of this kind of updated policy. So it's going to be updated again, and these non-custodial wallets will hopefully get back and be relisted. So I think, the story that kind of came up and resolved quickly in a sense, but it does point to something bigger here, which is the mere fact of this type of thing happening.
Yep.
Right. This
100%.
isn't like, it's particularly important when we consider, self-custodial wallets, because we're not talking about dating apps or games here, right? We're talking about people's ability to transact. We're talking about people's savings. We're talking about, money on the internet. So it's almost too obvious to say, but it's clearly concerning that kind of arbitrary, even automated policy sweeps like this can catch self-custodial wallets up in the mix and just kind of delist them at any time. Plenty of, bigger stories, I suppose, that this touches on as well. But any thoughts on this kind of snafu?
Yeah, I think there's a few things to think about here. I'm not sure about the details about whether or not they actually were delisted or not, but I think Peter Todd said something really interesting about that. Peter Todd, the creator, founder of Open Timestamps, some say he may be Satoshi. I hate that kind of speculation, but it is what it is. Smart guy regardless. He brought up something and said, maybe this was Google sort of floating this idea, and maybe our pushback, the outrage online, and everybody was outraged online. I mean, this was, the rage turned into the outrage. It really was, it was a real thing. There's a chance Google heard us. And I think that we probably should acknowledge that. There's no, I think Francis from Bull Bitcoin spoke up about this. Peter Todd spoke up about this. I mean, a number of people did, but Francis, I think, was one of the voices to pay attention to, given that I think Bull Bitcoin is one of the best non-custodial Bitcoin entity services out there. They just do an amazing job at creating really easy to use products where they're not actually touching the private keys. So they therefore don't need a money service business license. So, he pointed out in some of the comments with Lola, who published this article, founder of the Rage, he said essentially they can't do this because if there is no actual pathway to getting a money service business, they wouldn't be able to delist this. I guess the fear was that we all knew that, but now they were going to do it anyway. And I think Lola actually termed this sort of like something by monopoly. So like regulation by monopoly or something like that. So instead of regulation by prosecution, or whatever, the stuff that we critique the Biden administration for going after devs and crypto exchanges and all this kind of stuff without offering kind of clarity, but going after people regardless. Now we're seeing regulation by monopoly. The monopoly here, obviously Google, their monopoly over the Play Store, what most people use to download apps for their Android phones. Then people then came out and said, well, you can download the APK, which is I forget what it stands for, the Android something kit, but this is essentially like you could download the file online through a web browser, and then you can then have that file run on your Android phone. We don't have this option with iOS phones because it's a closed system. Androids run on Linux. So I think they probably heard. I don't think everybody downloading an APK is a solution. And again, with my stuff, it's like that's like a worst case scenario sort of situation. And it was cool to see BTC Sessions say he was willing to start sort of making sessions for how to do this. But again, like the way that I want Bitcoin to win is for it to be ubiquitous and it to be relatively easy to use. That's not Bitcoin winning, in my opinion. That's like Bitcoin being used as sort of like a money of last resort, or being used as a technology that's being sort of combated. And this is like the one way we can use it. We're not going to see broader adoption in that way. People are sort of scared enough of it for various reasons still, even with its sort of broader adoption by Wall Street and everything else. So I think Lola was right to publish this piece. I thought it was a great piece. I thought the reaction was really important. And I think if Google did actually hear us and maybe change their policy, or maybe they purposely left the policy as ambiguous, saying that they weren't just going to, I think the way they wrote it initially, or the way it still is that they weren't going to allow software wallets in the store. I don't think it said something about non-custodial wallets specifically, but obviously the term software would encompass non-custodial wallets that they'd be offering. So maybe they purposely left it ambiguous, tried to get away with it. We didn't let them get away with it. Ideally, maybe that would be the best case scenario. And, I don't know, that's the way I'm at least considering the way it went down. So I think an important moment, definitely something to talk about and take note of. These walled gardens are an issue. And we'll see where we go from here. But I think the pushback worked, if that's in fact what happened. And cheers to everybody for getting loud.
Yeah, I think, look, as you said, cheers for everyone for getting loud. The squeaky wheel gets the grease in these situations, right? Yeah. I don't think, I think it takes a lot to kind of get the Google comms team or any company of that size to actually respond within 24 hours to anything, initiated at the grassroots level. And so I think it's very likely that the reaction from Bitcoiners is what forced this kind of quick clarification here. Yep. Okay, moving on. Another quick one, or maybe not, depending on what you have to say about it. But India has launched a Bitcoin think tank, India's version of the Bitcoin Policy Institute, I suppose. You broke the story and reported on it yesterday. Any color to add to this, and what should we expect?
Yeah, absolutely. Shout out to my buddy Avi Burra. So Avi's based here in the States, but grew up in India. And he's going to be working with, I believe it's 6 other founders. The other 6 are actually based in India. And they will be doing research. They have 5 pillars. If you wouldn't mind scrolling down a little bit, they sort of give an overview of the way that they're looking to approach this think tank. So they have these 5 pillars. Yeah, there it is. So they want to talk a lot about mining at the state level. So talking with state level governments about mining. If you go to the north, India's neighbor to the northeast is Bhutan, and Bhutan has become very well known for its mining Bitcoin with renewable hydroelectric power. And a lot of that same landscape exists in the northeast region of India, which butts right up against Bhutan. So they're looking to convert this stranded energy into Bitcoin. They also, I think this is really important. They want to serve as sort of a credible resource for federal and state level officials. I think people really need this. I think federal and state level officials need something to point to versus like BTC fanatic 123 on Twitter talking about how awesome mining is. No shade against the NIMS out there, but we do need like a proper group saying like, here's some official research on this matter. So I think that's great. The idea for Bitcoin as national and corporate treasury asset. I'll give a shout out to Jet King. They're part of the Bitcoin for Corporations team that we have at Bitcoin Magazine or at BTC Inc. And I think there's some more from what I've been hearing through rumblings. I think we'll see some more Bitcoin treasury companies in India in the near future, for better or worse, depending on your feelings on Bitcoin treasury companies. Education, I think, is still huge. We're still really in the early stages of really educating the world about Bitcoin. And even if people have heard about it, they need to understand what wallets are, how to use them, what the benefits of Bitcoin are. So I'm glad that the Bitcoin Policy Institute of India will be doing this. And then also enabling payments. A buddy of mine, Vivek, that piece I linked to there, Vivek, who works on the Bitcoin Magazine editorial team, has said, Lightning has yet to become popular in India. And Avi, actually, I saw Avi at PubKey last night at an event, and he said, they're the traditional sort of fiat payment system in India, I'm forgetting the name offhand, is actually quite good. So Bitcoin for payments, I think it's at the bottom of this 5-pillar thing. I'm not saying it's ranked in terms of importance, but they have a pretty decent payment system there. So I think these other things are maybe a little bit more important for now. But Avi really seemed to stress when I saw him last night, this importance of using the stranded resources in India to mine Bitcoin, which seems like a no-brainer for any government to be able to turn their free and natural energy into Bitcoin. So shout out to Avi and the Bitcoin Policy Institute of India for doing this. I respect sort of anybody who's taking on this sort of initiative to educate the powers that be about the power of Bitcoin.
Absolutely. And hopefully we see many more like it springing up around the world.
No question.
Okay, so maybe the biggest story of the past 24 to 48 hours was comments by our call him our friend yet, hopefully soon to be one day friend of the show, Scott Bessent, was on Fox Business in the morning yesterday. And look, I won't play the whole clip here, but you can kind of, this is the context in this type of interview format. Anyway, you can see this is how seriously to take it. But he was asked about, I think, strategic Bitcoin reserve or about Bitcoin generally. And look, he said, he was interpreted to have said that the government is not going to be buying Bitcoin. Of course, we support it. Of course, we support all these regulations around it. We think it's strategically important, but we're not going to be buying it. And so there was, I guess, as anybody watching now is probably aware, quite a reaction yesterday. There seems to be not just a dashing of hopes of Bitcoiners, but it actually seemed to be a reversal of policy of sorts. The Trump administration in several forms and contexts has been, I would say, quite openly talking about the process of acquiring BTC since the inauguration. Bo Hines, when he was in his role, mentioned it many times. It was in these digital asset strategic working group, whatever it's called, report, and so on, right? And so comments from Scott Bessent on this Fox Business segment yesterday morning seemed to pivot away from that. Of course, it was only a few hours later that he either changed his mind or he was told to clarify things quick, smart, got a tap on the shoulder from someone at the White House and said, hey, just to be clear, we are indeed exploring budget neutral pathways to acquire Bitcoin to expand the strategic Bitcoin reserve. So, okay, a few things to touch on here. One is this is not the first time that there's this type of confusion that has arisen now, I think, coming from the distinction between the crypto asset pile and the strategic Bitcoin reserve and what these things are and what they could be and how they could be funded and so on. And, again, to remind everybody, there is now a crypto asset stockpile consisting of non-Bitcoin things, which will be funded by, forfeited assets and I don't know, maybe that's it, but no purchases. And so, and as Treasurer Secretary Bessent is mentioning here right now, there is this kind of question of Bitcoin that's been forfeited and other assets that have been forfeited as well. Separate to that, we have the strategic Bitcoin reserve, which, in his second paragraph here, he's talking about actual acquisitions. I think this is kind of a source of confusion. And whenever it's hard enough for us when we're talking about it to distinguish between Bitcoin and non-Bitcoin things, depending on the issue that happens to be at hand, let alone for folks who have many other things going on in their daily lives to distinguish between it too. So I think it was probably a slip of the tongue, or he just said what he felt at the time, and as I said, got a tap on the shoulder. In any case, we're back to where we started, which is in theory, Treasury will be exploring budget neutral ways to acquire Bitcoin. Now, what's more interesting to me, aside from the kind of back and forth with Scott Bessent yesterday, is this term, budget neutral pathways. What does this actually mean? Well, Senator Lummis has something to say about this herself. As we know, she has a bill currently sitting in the Senate called the Bitcoin Act, which would provide ways to fund a strategic Bitcoin reserve, primarily by, as she's pointing out in her post from yesterday, revaluing the United States gold reserves and using the proceeds to purchase Bitcoin. So that is one way to do it. Now, there are potentially other ways to do it too, but maybe before we kind of riff on that, any thoughts on all of the above? Drama from yesterday, and how seriously do you even take this idea of the Treasury buying Bitcoin at this point?
Yeah, these are good questions. I think the one thing I sort of why I'm smiling, I guess, is because I think not only did we get Google's attention this week, but we also got the Treasury by getting loud online. And I think it's funny because sometimes it feels like we're all just screaming into the void, but maybe we're not. Like maybe the White House is listening sometimes, and maybe Google's listening sometimes. We know Google's always listening, quote unquote, from in a metaphorical sense, or tracking our data. But this is the sort of listening we want them to be doing. We'll put it that way. I think that they've maintained some level of ambiguity here in terms of their approach, because they don't know what the approach will be. I would be really interested. I'd be interested to know if they were considering things like bit bonds, which I think are probably the most budget neutral, the most interesting budget neutral approach to this. Quick overview of what a bit bond is. So you'd be issuing bonds like normal, but I think 10% of that money would go into acquiring Bitcoin, the other 90% going to funding the government, but enabling the government to acquire some Bitcoin in the process of issuing debt. Seems like a really interesting way to go about. Again, is it technically budget neutral? I don't know, but at least it's not like taxing people or printing money to buy Bitcoin. It's a kind of version of printing money, I guess you would say. Issuing debt falls into that bucket of printing money. It's not exactly the Fed expanding the broad-based amount of money out there, but it is sort of a little bit of that nothing stops this train, Lynn Alden sort of like, we're going to keep issuing debt and or printing this money sort of thing. I don't know what the answer is. I mean, it doesn't really sound fun to be like, yeah, we're just going to look into more civil asset forfeiture, and hold on to that Bitcoin. Sure, that's fine. I guess, like, whatever. It doesn't seem like an exciting thing. I see my coworker Juan Galt commenting on that in the comments here. So I don't know. I really don't know what the answer is here. The SBR is not the most exciting thing in my Bitcoin world. I'll say. I think the one thing I will say though, I really like the way that one of the co-founders of the Bitcoin Policy Institute of the United States talks about it, David Zell. And he just says, look, I think it's prudent for the United States to have some Bitcoin. We don't need to go after getting all the Bitcoin. I'm personally not a big fan of the get to 1 million Bitcoin, because I don't think there's a way to do that without expending in a massive amount of political capital to say we're spending all this US dollars on Bitcoin. I just think that's a huge reach. And I think there's enough people who don't like Bitcoin in the United States for the United States government not to do that. And I think that that's fine with me. I don't care. But should the government have as much Bitcoin as maybe China or Russia? Sure. Yeah. Why not? Yeah. And do we know how much Bitcoin China or Russia have? We have like ballpark ideas, I think, but not necessarily. So we maybe should probably have more than the 28,000 Bitcoin we know about. On the agenda, I dropped in a tweet from my buddy Alex Thorne over at Galaxy Digital. I don't know if you could bring that up quickly if possible.
Will do when I can.
No rush. I'll give a little preview of what Alex said, though. I think on the take, so I think I wrote in the budget, it's in the agenda. It says here's some info about how much Bitcoin the US has. It's from intangible coins. So Alex essentially, I think he caught Bessent on that clip that we just had up before, talking about the dollar amount of Bitcoin that the U.S. government has. And it seems that dollar amount would indicate that the United States government has more than 28,000 Bitcoins, which is what we learned from the FOIA request that was submitted and what the U.S. Marshals provided. So it's not a given that the only Bitcoin the United States government has is what's in possession of the U.S. Marshals. So that would be Bitcoin that was gained maybe from like criminals using it, and then the government sort of apprehending them and taking the Bitcoin that they had, if possible, if they could get their hands on their private keys. I don't know if maybe Alex deleted the tweet. He might have. Either way, we don't have to get too far into it, but Alex did mention that Bessent mentioned that we had a larger dollar amount. It would indicate that we have maybe more than 28,000 Bitcoin. Again, this would all be
said like 120 to 160K was his estimate.
So ideally, it would just be great if the government could come out and just let us know if that's what we have. I think whether or not you fall on the spectrum of liking the U.S. having an SBR or not, I think it would just sort of maybe help everybody to know how much the government has regardless. Just especially as a U.S. citizen, it seems like, we have other ideas of how much of other assets we have in our strategic reserves. Why shouldn't we know how much Bitcoin we have?
I'll just, for my part, I think, firstly, I've got another budget neutral pathway that I want to talk about.
Let's go.
But before I even do that, I think to follow up on what you're saying, I think the most important point that you just mentioned that I agree with certainly is this question of political capital. How much of it is it worth spending to acquire Bitcoin, and for what purpose? Absolutely. I'm pro SBR. I think there is a strategic value in the United States government and any other government holding it. But buying it, I guess I'm less confident now in the ability to execute on that from the administration, given what we've seen over the past 6 months. Not that they've been incompetent, but I'm just less confident now that that's kind of doable in a way that doesn't just look like bag pumping.
Agreed.
So that's my concern, because if anything that happens that has that appearance can and probably will be unwound in the future would be my thought on it. But I will say this, one thing that may not look like bag pumping or even be bag pumping, and I think certainly has some legitimacy to it, is this idea of utilizing the Exchange Stabilization Fund. This is a fund at the Treasury that exists right now, with all kinds of commodities and foreign currencies in it and other things too, special drawing rights that exists just kind of for this purpose, to be there as a kind of a fund, a strategic, either rainy day and just kind of balancing fund. Created, in fact, under the kind of Gold Reserve Act of 1934. So it was around this whole time of FDR getting heavily involved with kind of gold regulation. So there's a kind of interesting history here. But the point is, this fund exists, and if this chart from usspending.gov is accurate, it suggests that there is about $42 billion in it, unobligated right now. So this is the kind of case that I think could sensibly be made, which is like, hey, we're holding on to all these currencies and commodities. We're kind of, at Treasury in this, stabilization fund. Why not add Bitcoin to the mix too? That makes sense to me. Of course, like I said, I think if bag pumping is your primary concern, I frankly wouldn't even be that excited about the SBR anyway, because whatever happens is not likely to be that big, and it is likely to be kind of politically costly as well. So
no question.
If bag pumping is what you're worried about, I would say start sending angry letters to Jerome Powell. That's kind of where you want to direct your energies. But relatedly, I guess, here's another story that is like somewhat related to this idea of state involvement in industries like Bitcoin. This is not really a digital asset story, but reports from
related though. If you don't mind, I want to preface it. Obviously, chip makers, they play a role in digital. I mean, they're creating chips, especially actually something we didn't even touch on, but we have Block introducing their mining hardware and their chip manufacturing in the United States. These things do factor into data processing, which factors into potentially Bitcoin mining or even other processing for other digital assets or whatever. So chip makers are a piece of the equation. I don't want to downplay it too much there. I didn't mean to cut you off though.
Yeah, no, well said. These chips, as we've seen, there are companies like CoreWeave and many others that are now straddling the data center companies, cloud service providers, they're kind of straddling this line between, being kind of AI companies and also Bitcoin mining companies, right? There's kind of a dual purpose, dual strategic focus, therefore, on these types of industries. So this story, which is that the Trump administration is considering taking a stake in Intel, could be significant. There could be, in a kind of second order context for Bitcoin mining in the United States. But also, and I don't want to draw too long a bow here, but if this story is true and if this does happen, I think it speaks to the even ideological point of view that the Trump administration is taking now with respect to state capitalism, kind of the balance between public and private sectors, and when there's a real United States strategic focus at play here.
Yep.
This would be a significant intervention into a very important market here. And, I think on its surface, this is not, a Bitcoin story. This is more an AI story.
Yeah.
But the Bitcoin strategic focus is one that they have spoken a lot about as well. Yep. And so I'd also raise that part of it, which is to maybe foreshadow how the Trump administration might think about strategic involvement in kind of the Bitcoin digital asset industry going forward.
No question. I think it's something to pay attention to. Not fully developed enough by any stretch of the imagination, but I appreciate you bringing this up because it is something we should be paying attention to. Also, there's still questions here of like, it's one thing for maybe his son to be involved in like a Bitcoin mining company. It's another thing. I'm assuming. So with the Trump administration taking a stake in the chip maker, is this being done on behalf of the U.S. government? I actually didn't follow this story too closely.
Yeah, I don't know, but what I can see from the kind of headline and some reporting is that it's talking about the Trump administration rather than the Trump family.
Got it. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah, I have to follow up with this a little bit more. I didn't have too much time this week, but I do think it's important to keep on our radars for future discussions for sure.
Yep. Now, something that's much more under the radar, and in fact, I haven't even reported on this myself yet. This isn't a huge story, but what this is a bill that was introduced in the New York Assembly this week, which, firstly, I'll just say, even I've been following these things. I'm not even technically sure how or why that's happened, because as far as I'm aware, the legislative session in New York has ended for the year. Nonetheless, we have a new bill being introduced here. You really only need to read this kind of title part up here.
Yep.
Putting a tax on digital asset transactions to expand the substance abuse prevention and intervention program to schools in upstate New York. A fairly niche issue.
How about that?
But okay, so this is a bill introduced by a Democrat assemblyman this week.
Could I ask if you don't mind? Was it so? It wasn't Clyde Vanell, was it?
It was Philip Steck.
Okay, got it. Yep.
Philip Steck.
Yep.
Now, I don't expect this bill to go anywhere, and there are lots of other bills like this that have been introduced particularly in liberal states like California, or even there have been, which I haven't even really reported on, but I would almost compare it to like Washington State, for example, and perhaps Connecticut, both introduced bills for wealth taxes, like blanket wealth taxes that would apply to Bitcoin, digital asset holdings and other things. These bills don't usually go anywhere, but I'll say this: that's from the point of view or in the context of the current political environment that we're in right now.
Yep.
There's always momentum for these types of bills from certain parts of the political spectrum. And honestly, like I'd like to have a really solid point of view on how important I think this is. I'm actually not sure. Like this bill is going to fail, but the fact that they keep I would expect so. The fact that they keep cropping up though is kind of concerning to me, because there are 50 states in the union. Many of them much more closer to a consensus on being anti-Bitcoin, anti-digital assets. And so I guess I would just flag it mainly as if you're wondering like, well, why do we need codified rights protections for, the right to transact or the right to custody? You might say, well, I don't need that. I can, I've got my private keys and I've got my cold storage and everything else. But laws like this can be passed, and then you can find yourself on the wrong side of it. And there's always a risk of this happening. So, it may not even be, it's like a thorny question to dig into here, other than just flagging it and saying like, this is kind of why we want to see clear codification of Bitcoiners' rights passed at the federal level. So we don't have to kind of, play whack-a-mole with all of these types of bills that are popping up everywhere, or well, not everywhere, but on a regular basis.
100%. I hang my head in shame again. I'm a New Yorker. I just my state just continues to disappoint me. I have nothing further to say on this matter.
Okay, well, let's not get too down on New York. let's move on to more interesting, although not necessarily more positively themed discussions.
Yeah, actually, do you mind, Julian, if we switch this up? Actually, I just wrote an article on this video, and I think it breaks it down a little bit more. So I just actually dropped that into our agenda. If we could bring up the actual article, I think it might be easier to dissect there.
Yeah.
No rush.
I will do that. Okay, I need to refresh the document. See,
no worries. Also, just for people who are to let you know who we're about to speak about, Freddie New is the head of policy at Bitcoin Policy UK, which is Bitcoin think tank, the Bitcoin think tank in the UK, the equivalent of the Bitcoin Policy Institute in the United States, and now the Bitcoin Policy Institute of India in India. So Freddie is a super cool dude. He's kind of like a real life superhero. I think his shoulders are so big that he doesn't even fit through doorways. He has to like turn to the side or something. So yeah, but he was just a great human being. I was actually hoping to have his partner at Bitcoin Policy UK, Susie Violet Ward, also a journalist for Forbes, join us today, but she couldn't make it. She's at BTC Helsinki, which is very cool, and I'm a little bit jealous. But so Freddie is the reason I wanted to bring this up is because I think it was last week or the week before you and I were discussing how like you and I aren't like anarcho-capitalists, cypherpunk, we're not. I don't use this term with a negative connotation, but we're not fringe members of society. I guess like we're not exactly.
Well, speak for yourself, frankly.
Right. Yeah, we're not exactly normies because we're in this space, but we're not exactly like the extreme of what you'll find in this space as well. And I love that extreme. So I'm not casting shade or anything. I think that extreme is really important. But I think Freddie, he brought up something in this conversation that I had with him this week for the episode of Bitcoin Politics I did, where he, he said like, dude, I'm a mergers and acquisitions lawyer. Like, I just really care about Bitcoin and think that we need to get this thing right. But he also said like privacy really is important for a number of different reasons. Talked a lot about honeypots. So when these companies that are sort of collecting our data or storing it, ideally we don't get into situations where all of his data ends up becoming leaked. We know that it happens to smaller degrees, but if there was ever bigger hacks, we would see plenty of data spilled. We've seen this with companies like Ledger, who collect their users' addresses, and then that information gets leaked, and now you have the addresses for people who hold bearer assets, Bitcoin and other crypto assets, on the internet. It's very dangerous. So he gave a list of just some quick tools that you could use to help make your privacy a little bit better. Maybe for people listening to this stream, it's not going to be like, this isn't going to be groundbreaking stuff. Use a VPN, use a fully encrypted email service like Proton Mail. I would say maybe setting up a Nostr key pair, really important. Maybe some people aren't on Nostr yet. I would advise it. But then also I think then getting into like progressive web apps, which is using apps outside of the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. And this is obviously timely based on what we talked about earlier with, what happened with Google this week. And then beyond that, learning to use APKs, which we also touched on earlier in this stream, which is, again, the actual files where you would download the file to your phone. Then you would sort of upload the app from there. He talked about BitChat, which is a really cool new chat app. Unfortunately, it doesn't work over very long distances, but it harnesses Bluetooth on your phone, creates a mesh network to then be able to allow you to communicate with other people who are in a certain proximity to you. And then it's sort of like other phones who are part of that mesh network can act as a relay. So I think it actually works with people who are only within 200 meters of you. But if you have one person here, then someone else, and another 200 meters, then someone else over here, you can keep stretching that out. It's a little bit complicated, and I wouldn't say this is like a solution to like, this isn't a competitor to Signal tomorrow, at least. So I think, it's interesting at the very least. And it's cool to see people developing this tech. And then basic things like, having a Bitcoin hardware wallet. I know some people maybe keep their Bitcoin on their Relay app if they're in Europe, or the Cash App if they're in the United States. But for a lot of people, I think only 11% of Americans actually keep their money in a self-custodial wallet, while a much broader amount actually own Bitcoin or other crypto assets. So taking that step to begin using a Trezor or a cold card, as Freddie said, it's important. And I think also with that, not that then you then have perfect privacy. Obviously, mixers would help more. What we've talked about with Samurai, and if you're using another network like Ethereum, using Tornado Cash or something. But it's not this, it's obviously you have more privacy than when you're just sending it from an account where you're KYC'd, your Cash App account where you're sending this Bitcoin to this person, it's a far better scenario to be sending it from a hardware wallet that's not KYCing you or anything. But I thought it was really good because Freddie, and Freddie talked about how he felt a bit nervous. Freddie is literally a lawyer that was trained at Cambridge, like the Cambridge, the university in the UK, the good one, the one that's been around for like 1,000 years. And, he's like, I'm not a radical human being. I just believe that it's important that we start thinking about these issues. So either check out the video, check out the article. I think I published it 10 minutes before we got started here on the stream. But really important stuff. And I actually personally think it's a really good thing that, I had this conversation with Freddie in particular because the UK put out this act called, it's forgetting what it's called now. It's like the UK. If you scroll down a little bit, I mentioned it in the piece, if you don't mind. It's the UK, the Online Safety Act. Yeah. Aimed at protecting children from seeing obscene or non-age appropriate content, which is like, seems good in theory, but there are other externalities and second order effects of this that are not so good. And that could actually hurt children in the long term. So having these conversations and doing this publicly, and also we're very lucky to have the likes of people like Freddie, who are otherwise law-abiding citizens, very normal people writing under their own name, not writing under a NIM. Not that I'm against that. I think it's important for some people, talking about these issues because Freddie has a pretty big platform in the UK. He's interfacing with politicians and regulators quite frequently over there. So, we want to try to support the message that he's sending out. Privacy is a right. You don't have to be an extremist or somebody who's looking to hide something to value your privacy online. So check out the article, check out the video. And also Freddie's a funny guy. I really like talking to him. So check it out.
Good work, Freddie. Yeah. I actually, just last weekend, I stumbled on a BitChat use case. And I thought it would be great to have right now. So I was actually, I was at a camping trip. It was a bachelor party, if I'm being honest. Camping trip in the kind of mountain range Sierra mountain range between California and Nevada, kind of fairly deep out there, and no cell service. And I was there with a bunch of guys, and we were responsibly behaving, of course, but at times. Maybe separated by more than just eyesight. And I thought, hey, this would be cool if we had a little mesh network going on here where we can all stay in touch. Of course, do so privately too. But anyway, that was, prior to that, I thought, okay, BitChat, I don't know when I'll get to downloading it, but now I can, give it a shot. See what happens.
Yeah, and shout out to, I think it was Kale, Calle. I sometimes pronounce his name wrong. A developer that works on eCash a lot, Chaumian Mints, and then and I think it was also Jack Dorsey who was a part of that. So shout out to Jack and Kale for working on this. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I want to finish with something a little bit different.
Yep,
Frank, because I know you've got lots to say on many things, not just politics and Bitcoin related, but of course there is a thread tying this to what we talk about, which is the future of Bitcoin and society. And it's a question of what do people think about where AI is going? Nick Carter had a kind of an interesting and sobering post just yesterday where he said that everyone I know believes we've got a few years max until the value of labor totally collapses and capital accretes to owners on a runaway loop. Basically, Marx's worst nightmare / fantasy, and there's this meme of kind of permanent underclass being created. And according to Nick, everybody that he knows subscribes to this. So there's this kind of ongoing question of AI, doom, and what does that look like? And what does the future of AI look like? Now, that's one interesting post from Nick, but I want to also highlight Mark Andreessen, kind of founder of A16Z, big time investor in tech startups, and of course, crypto and artificial intelligence too. His response to this was, I found interesting because firstly, this is someone at the epicenter of what's happening with frontier development of artificial intelligence. And he didn't rebut this idea from Nick that this may be where we were headed. And he kind of, he said, try to put maybe just a positive slant on it, that, hey, there's going to be mass deflation, prices for everything's going to collapse, and everyone will be happy. So before we talk about whatever potential tie-in this might have to Bitcoin and other things, Do you have any thoughts? Like, how do you feel about this? It's kind of the elephant in the room in some respects. Everything we're talking about, what's going on with artificial intelligence, and how some of the most important business people, politicians, and such feel about it and what they're doing. Any general thoughts on what's going on here?
Yeah, 100%. So I'm going to cite Jeff Booth here, one of my favorite people in the Bitcoin space. And also, for those who don't know, I think it was Mark Andreessen. I'm 99% sure. He's one of the earlier, he communicated with Satoshi, one of the earlier developers on Bitcoin, actually. He's since kind of in the broader crypto space. But I think that so for people who aren't familiar with this, I'll do it with my hand. So we're in like the S curve of Bitcoin adoption, where we've seen sort of exponential growth and it's sort of leveling off a little bit right now, but then we're going to see this other sort of bigger exponential growth. Well, no, I'm sorry. We haven't actually. So some people would argue that we're just in the beginning of seeing the growth with Bitcoin before we see it totally spike. And the Jeff Booths of the world, and as well as maybe Nick and Mark Andreessen, would argue that when AI adopts Bitcoin as its currency, and when AI gets full traction and it's just more ubiquitous and it's using Bitcoin to transact between itself, that's when we just see everybody who's holding Bitcoin. Bitcoin goes to whatever it does. If we're pricing it in dollars, $10 million, whatever it is. Will that definitely happen? I don't know. I know that Jeff Booth is a very intelligent individual, and I've personally had one-on-one conversations with him about this issue. And it's why he's so adamant about, like, please get off zero with Bitcoin. Please get some of this. This is the future we're moving into. With people like that, I'm sort of like, I want to be invited to the smart people party. Like, yeah. what are you guys? What are you guys talking about?
Yeah, who are all these people?
Yeah,
who are all these people talking about the future of civilization? And what are they saying? Yeah,
yeah. So it's always like I'm still waiting on my invitation, either in the physical or digital mail. But I think that there's probably something here, something to pay attention to. I don't think consumer utopia. Anything that would shift that quickly, I don't associate the term utopia with it. I think there'd be so much confusion that people, even if Bitcoin was the solution, there's not enough education around what Bitcoin is for it to be the solution yet. That sounds like a very Luddite response to this, but I know a lot of people, I've educated a lot of people about Bitcoin. They, even after maybe 4 years of reading my newsletter, they're still skeptical. So it's like, I've seen this up close. I've had a lot of these conversations. Makes me a bit nervous. This might happen. I think what Nick said might happen, no question, or there's a very good chance that it happens. It's also, I would say, the only thing to be careful of is like value of labor, like what labor, what markets, what jobs. Like, I think there's a little bit more nuance that's necessary here. All labor. And we just move into a utopia where you and I are doing this thing where we're both like sipping martinis on lawn chairs. Like, I don't, I don't know if that's the way things go. But that's my thoughts on it. I think Jeff Booth talks a lot about this. Generally speaking, the state of a free market is actually, the state of a free market is actually prices coming down essentially forever. The reason that we don't actually experience that in the market we live in is because we live with an inflationary currency or inflationary currencies all over the world. But any chart will show that virtually everything has gotten cheaper in Bitcoin. Some things more cheaper than others, but even something that's scarce like housing on Long Island, where I'm from, in New York or New York City, that's gotten cheaper in Bitcoin terms. So this theory can then be applied to everything, consumer goods, whatever services, everything gets cheaper in Bitcoin. I think that's fine. But then again, like, are our laws going to support this? What does that mean? Like, if Bitcoin becomes that powerful essentially overnight, if we're looking at this on a longer historical timeline, there's going to be other repercussions to deal with at that point. What happens to all the people who don't have it, permanent underclass stuff? This is stuff that doesn't really excite me. If you've ever read, and I have, like The Sovereign Individual, these books, they don't paint like a great picture of what humanity looks like under this. It's like you either get on board or you get left behind. I don't really want to live in a world like that. I know we might, but I'm not cheering for a world like that. I don't want a permanent underclass to exist. So I think there's going to have to be a lot of discussions, and I don't know what happens, but it's like for those people these days who don't have discretionary income to avoid dollar cost averaging into some Bitcoin, like, no, I don't think it's fair that those people just get left behind and that's the end of them, blah, blah, blah. And AI takes over. That being said, I'll say it once more, could happen. This could be the future we're looking at. I don't think it plays out exactly the way that they're saying. This feels like a little bit more of like the techno utopian crowd saying that this is the way things go, and things don't always work like that. So while they might, I wouldn't get scared. I'll put it that way. I wouldn't start allowing this to sort of like be something that makes you lose sleep. But what are your thoughts on it?
My thoughts are firstly that it's beyond my pay grade. There are very smart people, not just smart people, but closely connected to what's going on on the frontiers of AI that seem to be on either side of this issue. The kind of the doom side, and then the it's not even like doom versus utopia. It's like radical change versus no, things are just going to kind of get better, and you don't have to worry about society being upended, right? There are people all over that spectrum. So I kind of have to adopt, I guess, a position of humility, and no one can predict this stuff, right? I think to the extent that I have thoughts on it, and this is why I raised it, I think it is an important thing to think about, because there is disruption happening because of artificial intelligence. And there is, I think, going to be, whether or not it's really radical, there are going to be serious deflationary effects as a result, I think.
Which sounds great. Don't we want that after all the inflation we've seen?
Yeah. Now, the issue is deflation goes hand in hand with unemployment. For, reasons that we don't need to get into right now. All of that is to say, insofar as I can make a prediction, I would say if there are big deflationary shocks or trends in the economy, I think the one thing that's inevitable is that the government is going to play the one card that it has, which is to print more money, right? To kind of prevent that. And so yet another reason why, we can kind of close the loop here and get back to Bitcoin. And that's how it kind of all ties in. Maybe the last thing I'd say is, this is a personal thing. It's like, what do you do? How do you act in an environment where you have like this, where you have people predicting doom and gloom on the horizon, and you can't really make an assessment? My view is like, just kind of bet the under, just kind of like take the other side of that bet. Like, that's just how I'm going to behave. Like, it's not going to happen, because if I'm right, well, then great. I avoided worrying about something that I didn't need to worry about.
Right.
And if I'm wrong, then we're kind of all in the same boat together, and we cross that bridge when we come to it. Right. So it's a little bit like, I was thinking about it. It's a little bit like nuclear war, right? It's like, it's the threat of nuclear war is always there. And for sure, I think everybody's in agreement that should that happen, then the worst could happen. But no one really acts like it's going to, because what benefit would that be to anybody? At least people who aren't in positions to influence the outcome, right? So I'm at least for right now, until maybe more evidence of crazy stuff comes rolling in, I'm going to kind of treat this AI doom thing a little bit like I treat the prospect of nuclear winter, which is, I'm just not going to think about it as best I can.
I like that. I want to just touch on the way Jeff Booth approaches this once more, because Jeff Booth, for those, I like to refer to him as the Eckhart Tolle of Bitcoin. Eckhart Tolle being kind of like he wrote that book, The Power of Now, but sort of just, I don't even want to say, he's a spiritual guy, but more just like be present, be present to those around you, live your life. Don't get preoccupied with things. Don't get too caught up in things, which speaks to what you're speaking to right now. And I think Jeff, he's a genius in a lot of ways. And I think he sees a future, but I think he's far more optimistic. I don't think he sees this as like the doom future. I think he can see certain things that maybe those of average intelligence, like myself or something, that maybe can't see. And I think for better or worse, his optimism, his belief that moving to a world like this is actually a good thing is just worth paying attention to. Again, given that he's like a pretty smart, good-natured person. And if this is the world we move into and we all become quadrillionaires because we have some Bitcoin or whatever, and every sat gets worth $1,000 or something like that, like, use your Bitcoin to do some good stuff for people, help other people. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, choose to be decent. I don't know. Choose to support decent causes and blah, blah, blah. So I think that there's still a lot of human agency within this equation that people like Andreessen point out. Andreessen is notoriously pretty extreme in his beliefs. Again, but there's pros and cons to that, because if he wasn't, he wouldn't have been one of the first people to Bitcoin and one of the people building on it. So, but then at the same time, you know, he could be talking about something like this, agreeing with Nick Carter about sort of AI doom scenarios. So it's like you take it all with a grain of salt. Don't let it get to you too much. Continue to sort of pay attention to what's happening, but, you know, adapt as necessary. But at the same time, like, live your life. Don't get too worked up, and don't spread doom and despair. It's just not fun. Don't be like that.
Exactly. And and I suppose be aware when people might be talking their own book.
Totally.
As well.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think that's the last thing I had on the agenda. Before we go, you know, I'm trying to professionalize how we wrap up the show here, as well as everything else.
I like it. Yeah.
You know, I think we're developing a moderate viewership right now.
Yeah.
I would just say, firstly, thanks to everyone for tuning in, and also I would, and I know Frank would too. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah.
If you have any thoughts about how the show is going, or anything you'd like us to discuss. For those on YouTube, I guess, please drop a comment there. If you're on X, do the same. Throw us a DM. Let us know what you think of capital gains. We would love to hear it.
That's it.
We strive to get better and better every week. And thank you for being here, Frank. Any other closing thoughts as we wrap it up?
I appreciate that you're reaching out to the audience there. I think that's important. I'm thinking maybe we should set up a Telegram group, or I'll set up an email address where we could field questions and touch on things that people want. Ideally, what we're trying to do here is distill some of the most important things that are happening in the Bitcoin policy world, and maybe some periphery things like broader crypto space or AI. So if there's something that you guys want us to touch on, we'll think about better comms. For the time being, DMs work for sure. You could DM me via my Twitter handle, I guess Julian via his handle, or the Bitcoin Laws handle. Don't DM the Bitcoin Magazine handle. We get like a quadrillion Bitcoin Magazine DMs a day. But yeah, we want to hear from you. We do appreciate the fact that more and more people seem to be watching this. We're getting, I think, about 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 viewers per episode, which is great for a show that's only been around for 4 or 5 episodes. So super pumped. And we hope to continue to improve. I think, if anything, I have to give a shout out, Julian, even the breakdown of how the screens are moving around, you and I, and the data that we're bringing up, it's looking better and better. And it feels, on my end, I'm feeling like you're getting a bit more comfortable with it, which
thanks,
is
man.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Working on it. We'll get there. We'll be looking like a real show. Quick, smart. We're running a tighter ship every week. So.
That's it. Well, again, thank you guys, everybody, for watching. Julian, thank you for acknowledging them. Great work this week. And we'll come back. I think maybe we should just shoot for Fridays at 12. I think
I like it.
Yeah, Thursdays, but I think it's good to actually wrap the week up on the final day of the week. So
agreed. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. We will see you back here soon.